Hello, and welcome to Stories Across Borders. Here we discuss stories told across a range of different media, books, movies, games, you name it. The only rule is that we can only discuss things in terms of the writing. Anything like acting, animation, or mechanics is out unless it relates directly to how the story is being told. My name is Daniel Radford, author, man possessed by the arm of my old war buddy's clone, and also your host. And today I'm joined once more by John Kernan as we continue our very non-controversial cycle on politics.
Hello, it's me, the world's greatest soldier, fighting the war against the other greatest soldier and the other greatest soldiers.
Yeah, this one's gonna be a doozy. Today we're doing Metal Gear,
Woo!
which is a video game franchise that I forgot to put down a date for its first release for, but I think it was like late 80s, early 90s.
Yep.
And it's still more or less around. There's also a bunch of spin-off comics, books, and other media, all that stuff. But it all stems from the strange, strange mind of Hideo Kojima.
Yeah, it might just be because it's the series with the most games he's actually made in it or what, but the best like capsule of Hideo Kojima is definitely Metal Gear because this man throws so much of himself into anything he's in charge of, and he's a lot of things. He's very esoteric, he's very weird, simultaneously very self-important and very humble too. The the man who, if you asked him if he mattered to the industry, would just kind of be like, I don't know, I worked pretty hard. I'm just glad I left an impact. It doesn't matter that much. But also, when an earthquake happened, made sure to tell everybody on Twitter, don't worry, I'm okay.
Oh, he's something, all right. In fairness, I'm not that familiar with his work, and that also includes the source material for this episode. I've never actually played a Metal Gear game myself. I've only watched a full playthrough of Metal Gear Solid, which, as it turns out, despite being the title most people actually know of, it was the one I knew primarily as a title. It's actually the third game of the 11 mainline games. So, I've done my research. I've watched some stuff. I've watched through that one playthrough of Metal Gear Solid. But, for this one, John's the guy who actually knows what he's talking about.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. A lot of people forget about the first two Metal Gears, but the first two Metal Gear games were just Metal Gear 1 and 2, and they were like weird little top-down, almost like ugh, Contra is the game I can think of, but not. It controls a little bit like Contra with having your guns and your ammo and just like pointing and shooting, but you're also supposed to try to be sneaky, and it's a weird game that mechanically couldn't be more different from the other games. But it does provide some interesting and useful, actually, a lot of interesting and useful context in that you don't need to play them or see them to play Metal Gear Solid. But that doesn't mean that Metal Gear Solid isn't constantly aware of everything that happened in those games because a lot of it is relevant and comes up, including the fact that everybody won't shut up about Big Boss and the legacy of Big Boss, who is the villain of technically the first two Metal Gears, but I think actually probably only the second one because we'll get into it a little later, but spoiler alert, there's two big bosses actually.
Yeah, there's a lot of that in Metal Gear. So let's get into this. A brief, very, very pared down plot summary. I'm going to attempt this, and then I imagine you're going to have a lot of things to fill up. Shut up, crickets. I imagine you're going to have a lot of things to fill out for me.
Oh yeah.
So, this is the world of Metal Gear is set in a branching timeline from ours that changed sort of around the end of World War One, I think it was. Might have been World War Two, actually. one of those.
I think it was World War
And
II.
certain technologies are a lot more advanced. In particular, AI, cloning, and nanotech are leagues ahead of where they are in even now. And this game is largely set in like the 70s, I think,
Hmm.
the games. But so that's the main difference, I suppose, as far as everything else is more or less technologically what you'd expect. It's a vibe. In this alternate timeline, China, the US, and Russia have formed this secret alliance trying to control things behind the scenes, allegedly for peace. And they have
Allegedly.
created this secret military group Cobra to deal with various threats. In particular, they frequently have to do something to stop the various iterations of the titular Metal Gear, which is essentially a big walking nuclear silo tank thing, from being unleashed on the world.
Yeah, like Metal Gear is a fun robot, but ultimately, story-wise, the important thing about Metal Gear is always literally just the fact that it can move and it can launch nukes. Because normally that's not a thing.
Except subs and
Yeah, but like those
planes
have to
and
go in the water. They don't like walk and look cool, and planes
just
can't.
as a side note, the whole idea of oh, it can walk and fire nukes, that's why it's so deadly, is so funny to me when the only two bombs of the only two nuclear bombs to ever be dropped were dropped from planes, which can go anywhere a tank can go and more.
But to be fair, the first couple Metal Gears take place in like, I mean, still early enough, but like what, the 70s or the 80s when there weren't like missile defense systems. So somebody who's not even a major nation having access not only to nuclear weapons but the ability to launch them really far is pretty
I mean,
scary.
nukes are scary in and of themselves, so it still works. It's just funny to me that they were like, what will make them scarier? Legs, when no. Anyway,
What will make them scarier? Being a cool robot that you don't want to blow up because it's cool.
so the story is actually very, very spanning. It actually takes place across like roughly 50 years of constant conflicts following generations of different snakes who are members of Cobra with a similar code name and typically very similar genetics.
Yes, and for anyone who doesn't know, he's literally just named after Snake Plissken from Escape from New York of all movies, because Hideo Kojima is obsessed with movies, especially American movies, especially like spy action
He
thrillers.
even looks kind of the same.
Yeah, no, he's supposed to. He actually wanted to just make him Snake Plissken. I forget which actor it was. Is an old one of the old famous dudes who was in like every action movie. But apparently Snake actually Kojima wanted to get him to voice Snake in the first couple Metal Gear Solids, and he just couldn't get him. He couldn't get him, and he couldn't get the rights to the likeness, or he would have just made it Snake Plissken in the Metal Gear world. So instead, he's just called Snake.
Sort of. Anyway, across these various games, we generally explore the different philosophies and experiences of the various snakes and their various allies and enemies.
Yep, Snake is the best way I could put it without getting it to a specific character is Snake is the title of the world's greatest soldier. For one reason or another, each one of the characters we follow is both the world's greatest soldier of the time and goes by Snake, even though they're not all the same person.
To to be clear, though, they also a lot of the time kind of are, because cloning is a big part of Metal Gear, to the
Yeah,
point where there's a guy named Snake who later becomes Big Boss, and the character we all know as Snake, Solid Snake, is actually a clone of him. But there's also Liquid Snake, who's also a clone of him from the same batch as Solid Snake. And also there's also Solidus Snake, who is another clone of Big Boss, I think, who is somehow not related to him, and he's briefly president, and then Liquid becomes an arm who is attached to this guy Ocelot, who was originally Ocelot, and then he was Revolver Ocelot, and now he's Liquid Ocelot. And they're all actually the same guy.
And Ocelot is originally a guy that Big Boss meets and fights and beats, and then later recruits in the first game, and also later, later in the real timeline, but earlier in the game timeline, we also have Punished Venom Snake, who's not actually a snake at all, and isn't a clone of Big Boss, but also kind of is because he's just a medic who fought in Big Boss's army that was surgically altered and had his memories fucked with to think he was Big Boss and to look and sound exactly like him to basically be a super elaborate body double. And it was only revealed then that when it seems like you killed Big Boss and he came back in the first two Metal Gear games, all the way back at the beginning, it actually wasn't. They were two different guys, both going by Big Boss.
I can't believe I'm about to say this, but I'm so glad we're focusing on the politics of this franchise because it's much less complicated.
It's great. I love Metal Gear. Metal Gear's stupid.
Yeah, so just to be clear, that's the kind of insane shit we're dealing with. So it makes the politics angle seem simple.
Yeah, because in the broad strokes, most of the politics of Metal Gear uh are sometimes just in general on the modern day and the progression of things like technology, but mostly centered around the effects of war and the war economy and people's different philosophies on war and its place in the world,
In
and
theory,
especially
anyway.
soldiers, at least. There are big chunks of the Metal Gear timeline that are less about war itself and really more about who are soldiers? What should they do? What is their place in the world? Where should they go and what should they do when the world doesn't want them, but it's all they know?
Yeah, it's interesting in that a lot of the time the whole stop Metal Gear again story, a lot of the time that tends to be more just a very generic backdrop to explore the themes that Kojima wants to explore with any given title. And yeah, that usually does relate to the philosophy of war and where soldiers fit into the world. And it's a very interesting way to go about things. I'm going to be completely honest from the outset here. I don't think he always hits,
No.
but just even what he's going for, I think is worth discussing.
Yeah, and a lot of people feel like the man indirectly predicted 9/11, and he almost undeniably partially predicted a lot of the weird directions the world governments would go in over time and the effect the internet would have on politics.
I will definitely give him that one.
Weirdly prescient.
It's a lot like back when we talked about Lane briefly, how so much of that story was despite being very firmly rooted in science fiction at the time, was weirdly prescient about the direction certain technologies like the internet were going to go and the kind of effects that were going to have on people.
Yeah, and how people would use them and fall into them.
Yeah. As far as the political themes in Metal Gear goes, there is a lot of them.
Yeah.
The sort of the primary one, the one that is overarching from the very beginning and then reaches across basically the entirety of the canon, is this idea of soldiers being manipulated by politicians with their own personal ulterior motives.
Yeah, the idea that ultimately it's almost impossible for soldiers to have their own lives because no matter what they do, they are ultimately tools of the people who give them orders, sometimes even when they think they're not.
One of the things I do really appreciate is that they are very blunt and unflinching with this idea, the idea that soldiers are effectively they're pawns for politicians. They are to politicians, they aren't people. It doesn't matter how many flags you put at half-mast. It doesn't matter how many speeches you give about the heroes of your country and their sacrifices. You almost can't, in that position, look at them as people and have to look at them as assets. Otherwise, you have to contend with the fact that you are sending people to die for your values and your ideas. And that is a lot of what especially the first few titles seem to want to explore. It's this idea of how dehumanized soldiers are to politicians, this idea of what happens when democracy starts being corrupted and those ulterior motives and money games and political power games start becoming the focus more than the people, and the way those games then move soldiers as pieces, which ultimately to further the goals of people who have lost sight of and no longer care about why they were playing the game in the first place.
Yeah, and the games in general, I would say that that's a great way to describe the core thesis because it's in almost every game, and it's all the games never let you forget things like that, and also the fact that in some of the games, it's not even really accurate to call the people you're fighting the bad guys. Metal Gear loves to throw villains at you where it's like, well, this one thing they said is crazy, or their methods are wrong, but shit, a lot of what they're saying makes sense. Like, like obviously everything he does ends up being for the worse and is a bad, crazy thing because he's gonna keep war going. But the very first villain of the series, Big Boss, the whole reason he started doing the things he does is because he's the world's greatest soldier. He's fought so many other people. He's fought alongside so many people and killed so many people, only to be tossed away again and again and see other people be tossed away. That he's decided there should be a nation of just soldiers where soldiers can live and continue to be soldiers no matter what without just being the playthings of a nation. And there's still a lot of problems with that idea, but you also see how he got there through his personal experiences really easily. Where it's like, oh, yeah, his thing is I've always been a pawn. All the people who do what I do have always been a pawn. The problem is the system. I'm going to change it and do whatever I have to make a place for me and my people. It just so happens that all he's ever known is being a soldier, which means in a way all he's ever known is war. And he's not the man to create a paradise or anything like that.
Yeah, like he sees the flaws in the system and he feels the way the system has broken him and his colleagues and even his enemies. And he's like, well, you fuck this system actually. The problem is his solution isn't to build a better system. His solution is anarchy and chaos.
His solution is fuck it, I'm gonna make my own system with my own people, and all my own people are soldiers. It's gonna be a nation of just soldiers and people who know how to fight. And like that's not a foundation for a society.
The only
You
way you
can't
could
do that.
have that, the only way that society could function would be to continue warring to claim other resources and things.
Yeah, essentially what his society, if it fully came to be, would literally just be making it so that nations didn't really have their own armies and soldiers anymore. And that as war continued to happen, war would still happen, but it would literally be nothing but mercenaries. Every single nation would just be employing mercenaries from this big, same like unified pool of soldiers, which obviously would end up having a ton of its own problems, besides the fact that it would never happen because no matter what, every nation would just try to hoard its own military in secret because of that.
Yeah, it's a very flawed idea, but you do definitely understand why this guy, this greatest soldier ever at the time, would come to this conclusion.
Yeah, and ultimately that's why we get Metal Gear Solid 3 and to a lesser extent 5 is they are like showing us like, hey, obviously this person ended up sucking, but here's who they used to be and here's what like informed their later ideology and also ultimately broke them.
Yeah, because the thing you gotta remember about him is he was the world's greatest soldier. That doesn't mean he's intelligent. It doesn't mean he's a great thinker or a great politician.
And it does not mean he's a great person, most importantly.
Yeah. He is building, he wants to build a nation from broken foundations. It's not it's just not plausible what he wants to do, but he's going to try and do it anyway because he believes wholeheartedly in what he values. And I don't know, it's just like obviously it could never work. It will never work. It was a plan that was always doomed to fail, but that's not the interesting part of it. The interesting part of that is the reasoning behind the choices and what it says about not just the world of Metal Gear, but also how we, in our reality, view war and view politics and how we treat soldiers and things like that. Because, I mean, you think about it, right? On paper, like in political textbooks and things, even, and historical textbooks, things that I've read, back when I was in school and studying politics and history and shit like that, they describe war as communication. And it's not wrong that effectively that is what war is. It's just communication through violence to try and reach some sort of resolution. But that's such a watered down reality compared to what the soldiers who are on the ground and the ordinary civilians caught in the crossfire actually experience.
Yeah, because the thing you can't get away with war, no matter how you try to philosophize it or like direct it or broad strokes it or anything, is it's people killing each other. And that's something that, despite how it's always happening, that we as a species have agreed is bad.
Right up until it serves our cultural beliefs
Yep.
or our
And
economic prerogatives or
and Metal Gear very frequently has a lot to say about that. It's why, it even a lot of the villains who don't show up for very long very frequently get like at least a little bit of humanization, sometimes even posthumous humanization, where you find out like, oh, that person was doing a lot of like yelling and ranting when they tried to kill me, but actually they were a pretty important person who did a lot of things before I fought them, and now it's kind of tragic that they're dead. Like, um one of the good examples of that is the very first Metal Gear Solid, because almost every main antagonist you're fighting in that is a member of Foxhound, like one of the prime examples of what Big Boss was going for, despite this being after his death. And some of them are even people who served with him. These are not only great skilled soldiers, but very weird people who have either special abilities or special pasts or whatever. And because of who they are, how they were born, how they grew up, like Big Boss and like Snake, who you're playing as, they've never been able to be anything but soldiers. It's not only the only life they've ever had, it's the only life they were ever given an option for, really. And they are fighting for a similar thing because Liquid Snake, your other clone brother, being being a clone of Big Boss and also having hated his guts when he was younger, has grown up to see the light in a way and follow his same pathology. So you're meeting all these people who share the same dream as Big Boss just because, like, no matter how crazy it may be, it appeals to the only life they've ever been given, the only options they've ever felt like they had, and they're gonna fight for it tooth and nail to the death, and nothing is gonna let you save them, especially because you find out that, predictably, even the world's greatest soldier, even Solid Snake you're playing, who you know is a good guy because you get to spend time with him and see what he believes and what he thinks, is still a tool and a pawn of the state and the people who give him orders. Because turns out, even if you're trying to spare people, every single of the antagonists you encounter is going to die, including even some of the people you don't fight, because Snake was injected with a virus specifically meant to target and kill those people before he was even sent on the mission, and nobody told him.
yeah.
You weren't going to be given a choice in killing all the people who were wanted to be targets or not. Even the world's greatest soldier is still just a soldier.
It doesn't like autonomy was never a part of it. All of these people are very broken people who were always going to fight and who are always going to die. And your choices, your actions as Snake, not that it's a choices matter game, but I'm talking about the characters' choices. They don't matter.
Nope.
And really, despite the backdrop of generic action movie setting,
Yeah, Zanzibar Island is very much generic action movie setting.
and despite the plot of generic action slash spy movie plot, it mostly serves as a backdrop to these brief humanizing moments between soldiers who are fighting against each other or between Snake of the solid variety, usually, and the people he works with in one way or another.
It's almost a proxy war more than anything else because in the ultimate in the deep down sense, these people who are killing each other aren't even really enemies, but they're going to anyways, and they've never had a choice.
Yeah, their personal feelings are irrelevant. How they can think about each other is irrelevant. They are being placed on a battlefield by two opposing sides. They're chess pieces.
The Metal Gear series consistently does not let us forget that the people who made the decisions and caused these things that are happening are ultimately hundreds and thousands of miles away. And even later in Metal Gear Solid 4, when you are actually currently fighting the current person who's caused a ton of the shit that's going on, you're also not allowed to forget that a ton of other people did a bunch of shit while trying to keep their noses clean that are the things that led up to this and also created the man you are fighting against, even though he doesn't know it. You're fighting some like Liquid Ocelot, I should say, later on in the series, is a man who everything he does is about trying to take control of his destiny. All the while, he can't really conceive of the fact that he never was.
Yeah, it's as you say, right? I really like that you said proxy war because, well, it's also very relevant to like where the story probably came from because not only does Kojima obviously have all of the whole history of what happened to Japan
Oh yeah,
behind him, but
there's
he
a reason nukes are
was
such a big deal.
well, yeah, but I actually don't think that is the main reason. The main reason is
It's not.
probably the Cold War.
Yeah, the Cold War is huge. In fact, I'm pretty sure Metal Gear Solid like 3, the prequel one, is kind of explicitly a Cold War story.
Well, the games are largely like I can't remember the whole timeline, but they are primarily set in the 70s, I think, right? Into the
I
80s possibly.
think so. I can't remember for sure. The first couple definitely are. The timeline moves pretty far forward later, but the first couple games, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's 50 years worth of story roughly. So not only are they set in what is the Cold War era, as we at least it would be for, our history. It's a little bit different in Metal Gear's timeline, but I don't know how old Kojima is.
I don't know. I think he's like 50 something by now, I want to
But he
say.
he definitely would have been alive at least for the tail end of all that shit into the like 80s. Um, so
Yeah. Probably he was probably growing up in a world where everybody was acting like war wasn't happening while it still very obviously was.
there was also with the constant threat of nuclear annihilation
Yeah.
and also all of these global powers constantly having proxy wars.
Yeah, because it turns out when you introduce mutually assured destruction, it just makes people try to be less connected to the wars they're gonna fight. It doesn't make less war happen.
Yeah, it was an era where instead of fighting, I mean, it's still going on really, but it was an era where instead of fighting each other, the major players would start trying to puppeteer and fund and support other sides of smaller wars to try and further their agendas. For the US, a big example is this. Anytime any country was becoming even a little bit communist, maybe, they would stick their nose into it, and usually disastrous consequences.
Yep. The US the US dealt with one communist regime it really didn't like and then decided, okay, all communism is bad. If anybody's going to get into a little bit of communism, we got to give them a bop on the head, even though even though there's a lot more to communism than that and it's also not literally just communism.
Yeah, never mind if, the country wanted that outcome.
Yeah, also never mind if or if the country was choosing to become what it was along the way either.
Because let's not forget, Vietnam was a civil war primarily, where one side, the majority side, was leaning communist, and the US were like, haha, no.
The US was like, "Oh, what a beautiful green country. We're not going to let you put any red in this. So instead, we're going to put a different kind of red."
Never mind that, you lost anyway.
Uh, what are you what are you talking about? Haven't you seen Black Hawk Down? That's a heroic story of triumph.
That's not even about Vietnam.
You're right, I got it mixed up. But you know what I have seen is a movie I'm very ashamed I'm forgetting the title of, but it had Martin Sheen.
Apocalypse Now, I
Oh
think.
God. My brain was trying to come up with so many titles for other movies that I was just sitting there being like, nope, nope,
Which I
that's not
also
it.
haven't seen. I need to. But anyway, the point is, there's a lot of history that these games are built on, and a lot of real world politics that they are referencing. So that's why I like that you said proxy war, because it is kind of a microcosm of that, where these mercenary groups, these unrelated pieces on the board, in theory, are being moved around by these greater powers to serve these purposes so they don't have to get their own hands dirty. I'm like, that is literally a proxy war in miniature.
Yeah, it's you can very easily see how Kojima was colored by that stuff and how it's really interesting to see that he's one of the only I mean, he's not one of the only creators, but it's still a rare thing that I always appreciate in creators and you see that he very much was paying equal attention to the reality that he lived and the media and fiction he liked and consumed at the same time because you're seeing them very heavily blended together in Metal Gear. It has a lot to say about all the reasons that war is wrong and soldiers are tools, but it also has a lot to say about soldiers being these grand heroic figures of great scale. Because if you're not thinking about the implications of war and the value of human life, some of them are the greatest soldiers do these things that are objectively amazing in a skill and sometimes intellectual and like thoughtful planning way, but that doesn't change all the overarching things of them being tools and also ultimately them being killers. And again, we're generally supposed to have agreed as a society and species that we don't want to die. Killing is bad.
It's a very much intended to be a commentary and reflection of reality. The majority of the time, and I would argue pretty much all of the time, wars are not fought because the common people want to go to war. Wars are fought because of the political goals and machinations of people in positions of power, a minority section, sect of society who have wealth and power. And then it's ordinary people, the poor, the lower class, the propagandized who are moved into the actual conflicts who then suffer and die for it. And that's one of the things we see so much, especially it was a very big part of Metal Gear Solid was that the entire time Snake and I can't remember her name, the woman soldier, the rookie,
Meryl.
Meryl, right? The entire time they're in on this like island in this facility risking their lives, being used as pieces, especially Snake, to kill these other people, whether he knows or not, because he's carrying this virus, which may kill him, as a side note, as far as he's aware.
Yeah, yeah, no, technically the virus is he's a part of the group the virus is meant for.
Yeah, his survival is not that important to the people in power, but the thing is, we
In
as the
fact, his survival is a threat to them as the world's greatest soldier. They can't take the chance that one day he could be going against them.
yeah,
They're just gonna set things up so that their tool gets thrown away as soon as it's done doing its job.
a major like part of the way the game is formatted is we have these comlink discussions, and we are constantly cutting back to these discussions between Snake and the people off of the island who are giving him orders and supporting him. And through those discussions, we are also constantly seeing hints of what is going on behind the scenes, the political movements, the disputes between different parties in the government and in the military that are all influencing what is happening on this island from so far away. And it almost feels like the real conflict isn't the part that we are in as Snake.
Yeah, it's the part that's happening off screen in the land of the land of the earpiece and all the people we're communicating with.
And I think that is such a clever thing to do, to essentially have the real story be something that's happening in the background and you're just suffering the effects of it.
Yeah, it's funny because in a way it's like you are the hero of this story, but you are not the cause of the story. You are not the motivation for the story, and you are not the biggest player by a long shot. You are just another piece at the end.
As is everyone else on that island. The only person on that island that anyone not on the island gives a shit about is Meryl.
Yep. And that's literally just because of blood.
Yeah. And I
She's
mean
just somebody's
that's
daughter.
I think she's his niece actually, the colonel's or
Oh,
whatever it
niece,
is,
you're
but
right.
that's by design too. That's also very much on purpose. It's the idea of it's there to show us that everyone's expendable and no one cares to these people until it's one of their people. And by that I mean their family, their blood, people they love and are concerned about. Then someone that survival's a priority.
Yep. Yep. It's done constantly. I mean the main antagonist that Big Boss himself when he was Snake had to fight was essentially his mentor and also his adoptive mother. Like she was a soldier, ironically a soldier who made a slightly better, slightly more wholesome version of the choice he would later make and decided to defect from her nation and the politicians that were controlling her and try to set up something better away from them. And she was killed for it, and he was the one who was made to do it.
Yeah, that's brutal.
Yeah. Yeah, that scene is rough.
Of course, it's not just about the fact that these greater powers are playing puppet with soldiers' lives. Obviously, that's the main overarching theme of the series, but there are other things that it gets into. One of the things we've touched on is that it's kind of deconstructing the sort of war glorifying tropes of action and spy movies because Kojima loved movies, but also had a lot of political commentary he wanted to make.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I sure he still loves movies, but
He loves the cool spy action thriller stuff, but is also very aware of all the reasons that it's not really as glorious as it looks. So he's going to have fun with both sides of the coin.
but the thing is as well is that that relates to another very baked in theme and idea into the series, which is very much how identity and philosophy are shaped by media and propaganda and culture, and how that can be used to manipulate people.
Yeah, that's true because the manipulation goes so far back and is so ingrained that the vast majority of the people in the series really do think they're making their own decisions for their own reasons. Like there aren't that many characters you're dealing with who are even aware how many of them and how many of us are just pieces on the board and how much of this was decided from way behind the scenes and controlled and decided so long ago.
I mean, you gave a perfect example of Big Boss back when he was a snake, I believe, was
Yeah.
basically told, "Hey, this person, your old mentor, they're the bad guy now," and led to believe they were doing some horrific thing. And then they had to go. Went in, they killed her and tore down everything that she was building. And then it turns out, no, she was building something, you know, separate and not under their power, and that made her a threat. And that was the problem.
Yeah. Exactly. You can argue the same stuff about Big Boss, although who knows, maybe she would have done a better job, but their philosophies are similar enough that you can argue what she built wouldn't have been any better than what he ended up building. But that still doesn't change the fact that all she really wanted was for her and the people she cared about and who are the same as her to be free from all this control and manipulation and to like make the decisions and control for their own lives. And that alone was a reason enough to make her own student and kind of son kill her for them.
Yeah. The other thing as well, though, is that one of the things that these games do is they basically say, okay, think of those war movies and action movies and spy movies that, they're so much fun. You really like them. Okay, here's what those stories would look like if you knew what life was like for all those mooks your action hero badass was mowing down.
How does it feel to kill these people that you have been very clearly and directly taught now are in fact people with feelings and histories and lives?
In
Do you
fact, they
feel
are
good about
people
it?
just like you with very similar histories and experiences in lives who've gone through all the same shit.
Yeah, does it feel good?
Yeah, does it still seem glorious? And I love that because every single character that inevitably dies at your hand is someone who is damaged, who have been through the same horrific experience as a snake of the solid variety usually. Every single one of them is tied to the exact same wars that Solid Snake is tied to historically, has been broken and damaged by those same wars, waged by those same puppet masters. And your presence there as their enemy not only dooms them to death, but half of the time they never get to die from not always anyway, they don't always die from the virus. A lot of them you just kill. The sniper wolf wants to die with her gun in her hands because it's all she's ever known.
Yeah, she's fighting even less for any real reason than any of the other people. It's just so thoroughly all she knows that it's the that like she has to die that way to not feel empty inside and like her life was pointless. So she is going to fight until she dies.
Even though she's not a bad, like, yeah, she's a killer, but she's not evil. She is kind. And we know that because we know that from interacting with I hate him so much. What's his name? The
Oh,
scientist. Our weeby
oh
friend who loves his Japanese animes.
my gosh, it's just like my Japanese anime
I
Otacon.
finally know where that meme comes from.
Yep.
Oh
Yep,
God.
Mr. Otacon himself, who he's really annoying. He gets better in the later games, and thank God, because guess what? His dad was way worse. Huey was a piece of shit. Absolute disgusting, awful scumbag. Just as whiny and sad and pathetic as Otacon is the very first time we meet him, while also actually being a bad person who like was fucking around, cheated on the mother of his child, did a bunch of stupid, awful shit, and then ultimately just got himself killed like the bitch that he was.
It's so fun. Like he's such a uncomfortably cringy character. but then he also drops lines like, "Do you think love can bloom on a battlefield?" It's like, Jesus Christ. Okay, now we're doing poetry. Make up your mind.
I know it's yeah, I'm genuinely so glad he gets better. And I'm sure part of that is just Kojima getting a better idea for who he wanted Otacon to be, because I'm sure he's at least a couple notches more cringe than he intended in the first game. But
Some of it could also be translation.
well, and you know what? A big part of it, it also very directly feels like a big part of it is actually also just that Otacon grew up. He was very naive and not super privy to all these things when the first game happened. But during and after the first game, he continues to spend more and more time and work with Snake and be exposed to the themes of so many of the things that's going on, to the point where in some ways he becomes a little bit of an audience insert, because once he grows up and is starting to react to all these things happening, a lot of the reactions he's having are the reactions like the audience is having to like changing ideas on what this all means.
Yeah, I mean, because that's the thing. He's really cringy, at least at first, and uncomfortable and kind of annoying. But not only does he get to drop that banger of a line, but the thing is he is a really important character because he shows us. Because he got into like all that science stuff because he was inspired by Gundam, basically. He thought making robots was cool, and so he got into all that. And because that's what he wanted to do. He wanted to make those robots. It was a very innocent, naive kind of thing to do. And he's just a soft, romantic person, really, who doesn't even realize he's a piece in this puppet game where lives are on the line until he becomes affected by it in person and has to experience the hell that the soldiers go for. And that shit is traumatizing to him.
You can see the changes he goes through um throughout the games, and like not just that, but the changes other characters in the story go through, including characters who don't really show back up on screen, because pretty much everybody Snake works with who doesn't either die or prove themselves to be a horrible person in the first game, and that Raiden works with in the second game, defects from whoever they are. And it's crazy that despite all this, Snake ultimately kind of ends up having a similar dream to Big Boss and the boss before him. It's just that he doesn't want he wants the same freedom and like ability to live for all these soldiers, but he has a much better idea of what that actually means. He doesn't want them to be soldiers forever. He more or less kind of like starts and not quite leads his own faction that's going to get away from all this and just try to break the cycle and stop the fighting. It's kind of funny where we have multiple big important characters who want to break the cycle, and it's almost partially, I should say, validating to the previous people with these dreams of soldiers being able to live their own lives, in that they were all trying to break the cycle, and ultimately our main character and ostensible good guy still commits to breaking the cycle. He just learns from the people who did it before and like is trying to do it in the best way possible. And he's not just breaking the cycle for soldiers, but he's trying to break the cycle for all the people he's worked with and dealt with, who, even if they aren't soldiers, were still just tools and pawns in the same system. And you can see that in how many of the characters that used to at some point be contacts for Snake or something go off and start their own projects and become very different people. And some of them even then come back and work with him again later as very changed people from their experiences, who also just want to break the cycle.
Yeah, because he realizes, because like back in Solid, he is basically another puppet. He doesn't really have any particular viewpoint of his own through most of that game.
He's just doing the mission. It's what he's always done. It's what he's always been.
he becomes progressively more disturbed by what the people behind the scenes are doing and using him to do. And I
Yeah.
imagine, and like when he comes off at the end of that, goes off into the sunset with Meryl at the end of that game, he's sort of coming to the conclusion. I think that's where it really starts, this idea of I don't want to be a part of that game anymore. So I imagine that that's what the later entries are very much building on, this idea of in order to break the cycle, the game has to stop.
Yeah, and that's part of what's so tough about Metal Gear Solid 4 is even now Snake is still fighting, but that's because he hasn't been able to make a big enough difference. The war economy and everything is a thing that's only gotten heavier and worse. By the time of Metal Gear Solid 4, Big Boss's old dream of what he was trying to create, although more warped and twisted than what he was doing, has more or less become reality. Wars are being fought entirely by and with private military companies being hired by the nations and not even the nations and their own militaries. Like that's just become the normal experience and the normal place of war in the world by Metal Gear Solid 4. And the only reason Snake is still fighting is because the world literally will not let him stop yet. He has not managed to break free from the cycle or break it for others yet, and he's doing everything he can, but unfortunately, he's a clone. And so even though he should only really be in like his 40s, I think, or so by Metal Gear Solid 4, Snake is getting old. He can't do this much longer. All he wants to do is try to stop all this fighting and stop being a soldier, and he doesn't have that much time left to get there.
Yeah.
And that's why we have the crazy scene of the absolute madman, despite being old and tired and dying, literally crawling through a hallway of microwaves to try to get to where he needs to stop all this.
Yeah. Like that's not just a commentary on the puppet game that is war, and war politics. That is a commentary on how deeply rooted, and also the war economy. You keep mentioning that, like, that's a very good point as well, is that the privatization of war in these games is very much a representation of the oh God, the military industrial complex. I got there.
Yeah.
How much of war is actually just about the movement of money, often by individuals and companies at this point, not just, economies are
Yeah.
dependent on it.
Because money is always a self-proliferating thing. So when war becomes about money, the more influence that system gains, the more it does to spread and try to make every other system become the same thing.
So it's a comment. It's not just a commentary on all of that. It's showing that because it's so deeply entrenched, the kind of lengths that this man is having to go to try and just dismantle a part of it.
Not even the whole thing, just a part, just the piece he can influence as a person.
It's the games are kind of wacky and a bit silly, and they have these very generic surface level plots, but behind that, all that, it's so bleak.
Yep. Yeah, it really is. On a slightly more positive and only slightly less political note, though, first games to ever feature and talk about bisexuality.
Yay.
I, sorry, it's just I always have to mention it. There's such a funny
I did
moment
not know
partway
that.
through.
Are,
Well,
are they really the first?
one of the people you, well, they're pretty old.
Yeah,
But
true.
maybe not, but the first that I know of at least, because they outright talk about it, even if it's only a little bit. And that one of the people you fight in Metal Gear Solid 2 is this guy called Vamp, and he seems to be immortal. He's like super strong, super acrobatic, very pale, and even seems to need blood to live. So you're like, aha, Vamp. But you literally get a conversation where somebody's talking about him, like, oh yeah, Vamp. The guy is he drink blood or what? And you basically get told, oh no, that's more like a term thing. He's actually called Vamp because he's bisexual. And you're like, huh? Excuse? Oh, yeah,
That's
I just wanted to throw that in before we were done.
that's so that's both funny and also like such a product of its time that it would be called that at
It
all.
is. It absolutely is.
But yeah, so one of the thing as well that you've touched on a bit as well is this idea of how the dream of freedom has changed and been interpreted by all these different people. And I think that that is a part as well of that overarching theme of how of the way philosophy and all that is shaped by media, propaganda, culture, experience, and how people manipulate those things to their own ends. Because so much of what goes on is this puppet games, and the one of the primary tools they use to play this game, other than just moving money, is by playing on this ideal that so many of these characters have of breaking out of the cycle of being able to make their own choices. And it's kind of fucked up, but they so often characters want their desire for freedom, for autonomy to make their own choices is what these people are using to play them.
Yeah, breaking away from the cycle becomes part of the cycle.
And it again, it just goes to show how deeply entrenched war has become to everything, and it's in this setting and in reality, which because again, these games are a commentary on a lot of the things that are just true about the world that we live in. They're just overblown and made a bit wacky and Kojima-y.
Yeah, and there are a lot of parts of Metal Gear that, aside from Snake and the people he works with and who join him, seems very hope and bleak or hopeless and bleak. And it's really, we're kind of only given hope through a select group of people, including Snake, but a couple others, even some of the people who aren't directly working with him, and that we're reminded that as hard ingrained as all these negative parts of the system are, that there will always be people who are going to be doing and giving everything they can to try to break the cycle and try to stop this like senseless manipulation and hurting of other people and getting people to hurt other people just for selfish reasons and for gain.
Yeah, there's a little dash of hope in all that bleakness.
Yeah, it's slow going and it's tough, but we do get to see the beginning of some things at least getting better by the end of Metal Gear Solid 4.
Yeah, I do like that we do see not only how deeply entrenched things are, but that cancer is being dug out of that society. You know, I
Yeah. And
it's hard going, it's grueling, it's probably going to take generations more, but they are making progress, and that means we can do that. It's possible. You know, that's what it's trying to show us.
yeah, and one of the ways they show it, which it's if you think about it, in some ways it makes sense, although it can still be a tough pill to swallow because we've come to realize by now that he was a bad person in a lot of ways. He was a villain. We find out only at the very, very end of the series, while Snake is literally visiting his grave, that Big Boss survived despite him being such a huge figure and such a thing for people to follow and like an indirect inspiration for some of the good things, but so many of the bad things that have continued to happen throughout the series. This man has been hidden in the shadows, alive this whole time. And the only saving grace we get is that despite the fact that he probably deserves to die for some of the stuff he did, he has come around and he has also made the same decision as Snake and decided to stop fighting. It he should have made it a lot faster, but it happened
It's still a sign of
eventually.
progress. We'll take it, I guess.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, oh, well, I mean, you suck. I'm not going to say I'm glad you're alive, but I mean, I guess, hey, at least I think it's a good example for Hope, partially because he's not that great a person, that even this guy who was willing to do all these terrible things and who fell down a dark path and became a terrible person eventually by surviving and not just dying beforehand, eventually saw the light and made the right choice. You can argue that it's too late, but it's still a sign that things can always change and turn around for the better.
Which, you got to take those sometimes.
Sometimes, sometimes the best you can do is like, well, it took too long, but it happened.
All of this is really clever. It's really well done. I love the idea of the way all these surprisingly deep and complicated themes are buried under what is surface level, the video game equivalent of a generic action spy movie.
It seems like it should be junk food.
And done that way on purpose, because that's part of the point that is being made. It's it is very strange and very clever. I will say that it does kind of fail itself when it starts approaching its stuff about like race and genetics and the ethics of genetic science and cloning and things like that.
Yeah,
I
can't forget that our main character is a product of eugenics.
I don't think it does a very good job of yeah, eugenics being a big part of it. I don't think they do a great job of exploring those issues because so much of it is lost behind the insanity and the zaniness of the 30 different snakes and
Yeah.
uh like I can see what he was going for, the idea of, again, government mandated eugenics, this idea of how you're even if you have the exact same genetic code, the people who are choosing the culture you're a part of, the people who are choosing to puppet you and use you as a tool will influence the beliefs you have, the decision you like. I can see what they were going for with that, with what Kojima was going for with that, but I don't think they really succeeded on communicating all that very well.
No, especially since it means part of what the bad people who are the cause of all this thought was true, and that the only person who could be relied on to really fix this problem was ultimately just a copy of the guy everybody was so obsessed with who started all this shit down its worst possible path to begin with.
Yeah, so I would say it does fail in those areas, but overall it is a very, very strange but very clever story spread across 11 mainline games, a bunch of other spin-off content. I think that, it's not perfect. Some of the dialogue, especially I'm sure translation comes to a part of, some of the dialogue is really clunky or weird or awkward. Some of the characters are kind of insufferable. Some of the writing is just in general, but overall, what was being done with these stories is so clever and so well thought out, and is such a good way of representing these themes that you've got to hand it to Kojima and the people who worked with him on creating this franchise.
Yeah, it Metal Gear is a ultimately a very flawed and silly, but also extremely like thoughtful and poignant like study and statement on a lot of politics in general, but just especially war and the effects it has on people and what it does to people.
Yeah.
And why, no matter how much we want to dress it up and how much it's important for it to be glorious for propaganda and all sorts of other shit for people's morale, in that it's war itself might not necessarily be something to be called evil, if only because it has a will, but it is an evil effect on the world and a thing that it should be a goal of all of humanity to stop.
Well said. On that note, though, I think that we've covered as much as we really can. I would like to be able to get into it a bit more, but my knowledge is a bit lacking on later entries and stuff in the timeline.
It's
Also,
okay.
we've
Maybe some other time we'll talk about Raiden and child soldiers, because he's one
um,
of those.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, wait, look, when we do these long-reaching franchises that have like 11 entries minimum plus all the other spin-off content, chances are we're not going to be able to get into the depths of everything they touch on. I mean, how
Nope,
many different Star Wars episodes have we got at this point?
that's a lot.
uh, on different parts of that franchise. So, maybe we'll come back to specific Metal Gear games for different cycles at some point. Who knows? Until then, though, I think we can leave that one there because we're coming up on time anyway. So, if you
Yeah.
have enjoyed us discussing the insanity that was this game or the complexities of politics and how it relates to fiction in general, you can find more of these episodes on my website, radfordwrites.com, where I also share other stories and poems and things I've written, where I write blogs and articles, and where my books are available. If you're already there, you can find these episodes on Spotify and YouTube and Apple Podcasts and all that stuff. And you can find John streaming on YouTube and Twitch as Sephir, Sephear.
That's right. And remember, war is bad. Don't
War,
kill people.
war is in fact bad. Goodbye.